Well, first off, I want to say welcome to a very special President's Dialogue. Again, my name is Ross Lorda, the student body president here at the University of South Carolina. I would imagine there are a lot of film and acting students around the world who would give anything to be in these seats, sharing a dialogue with the great Francis Ford Coppola. This is a wonderful and exciting opportunity for all of us. Before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping notes. The first, we ask that you not only turn off your phones, but put them away. We've been asked to refrain from photographing or filming this event, which is actually a great idea, as it gives us an opportunity to fully engage in this once-in-a-lifetime conversation without any distractions. I ask that each of you respect this simple request. Also, at the close of the President's Dialogue, we'll be offering some wonderful CBS Studio Door prizes, compliments of alumnus and CBS executive Barry Siegel. You'll undoubtedly want to be here for the drawing. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our president, a man who so many of us already know, appreciate, and respect. We've seen him on campus, at events, at student forums, and even on Twitter. I've had the great pleasure of knowing him in student government for 3 years, meeting with him to discuss student issues, but also having a role model who exemplifies what it means to be a president. Nothing can summarize our president's passions for students than this past Sunday evening. As thousands of students gathered in front of Thomas Cooper Library to celebrate our men's basketball victory over the Duke Blue Devils, he not only chanted with fellow students at 1 a.m. in the morning, but he agreed that when both teams win a national championship, we can cancel classes in celebration. Since his presidency began in 2008, President Pastides has been an unwavering advocate for a superior student experience, encouraging engagement beyond the classroom through leadership, service learning, international experiences, internships, and undergraduate research. He's also committed to civil and substantive campus conversations. President Pastides offers unqualified support of diversity and inclusiveness, which is reflected in bold initiatives such as the Center for Civil Rights History and Research and the Welcome Table SC, both critical in creating an era of greater unity and purpose. We respect and appreciate our president and our First Lady, Ms. Patricia Moore Pastides. They are a dynamic team, great leaders, and absolutely wonderful neighbors. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our University President, Harris Pastides.
Well, thank you for that overly generous and kind introduction. It is March Madness Week at Carolina, and today we have Francis Ford Coppola with us. Let me tell you, we are here at the Russell House at the heartbeat of the university because Mr. Coppola wanted to meet the students. He wanted to share his vision for you, something called live cinema, which you have been introduced to, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But make no mistake about it, we could have filled up the Koger Center, the Coliseum, the Colonial Life Arena, maybe even Williams-Brice Stadium. And he said, no, I would like to be with the students of your university. I'd also like to welcome Eleanor Coppola, screenwriter, director, and producer. And anytime you'd like to return and do a dialogue with us, we would be grateful to you. We're so excited to hear about your new projects. Rachel Patillo, who is on the Coppola team, and Barry Siegel. And Ross told you a little bit about him, but let me tell you 2 words more. Barry is a 1979 graduate of our J School. Anybody here majoring in mass comm or journalism? Great. Senior Vice President and General Manager at CBS Television City. If you've ever seen Dancing with the Stars, that was not Barry dancing, by the way. And many other productions, many other productions. He runs that operation. And they have so much respect for him. You probably know that show does not air on CBS. But they have so much respect for the operation and the technology on that set that they choose to film there, and they could choose anywhere in the country. He is also a fellow of the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, and to be a fellow of that means you're at the peak of your profession, and he's won 2 Emmys in his own right. Let's welcome Barry. Francis Ford Coppola is best known, of course, as a 5-time Academy Award-winning director of epic films, the Godfather trilogy, Apocalypse Now, a producer and a screenwriter as well. Born in Detroit in 1939, Francis moved with his family to my neighborhood, Woodside, Queens. I'm from Astoria, but that's a stone's throw from Woodside. He was a prolific theater and film student at Hofstra University on Long Island and then at UCLA. His first mark was as the Oscar-winning screenwriter of that great movie, Patton, and as I said before, followed up by a litany of movies that many people, many people consider their favorites. The critics say among the best ever made, but I think more importantly to him might be when people say my favorites. My personal favorite is New York Stories, by the way, a wonderful movie that I so much enjoyed. He's also done things off the high-budget platform. He's made films including Youth Without Youth, Tetro, and Twixt, which were shot in Eastern Europe and South America. His current project is the creation of what he has termed live cinema, which he'll discuss with us today and show us one of his live cinema workshops entitled Distant Vision. As a writer, director, producer, and technological pioneer, he's created a body of work that has helped to shape and is still shaping contemporary American cinema. Let's all together now please welcome Francis Ford Coppola. Welcome.
Thank you. So before we see this presentation, I did think I needed a few minutes to explain to you what I was trying to do, what I was trying to learn. I think it's important to know that very often film or artists of all types embark on things that they have no idea how to do. So when you yourselves, as younger people, have a project and deep down you, no matter what you may say, you really don't know how to do it, you're in good company. I can think back when I was trying to get some support financially to do Apocalypse Now, and I was saying, well, we're going to go and it's not going to be like documentary style, it's going to be full out helicopters flying around and destroying villages. And the truth of the matter is I had no idea how to do it. So when I got there and had to face really doing some of those things, and this is before digital effects existed. The cinema was still photochemical, mechanical medium. And so, we sort of learned as we were doing it. And it was a traumatic and frightening experience, to say the least. But just that film was a photochemical, mechanical medium. We all know that in the last maybe 15 years, step by step and almost stealthily, cinema has gone from being physical film on celluloid that's edited on a machine and shots glued together. And it started with sound, of course, because sound was the first part of cinema that could become electronic. And I can remember when I was your age trying to break into making films that we would say, well, but now, sound was always recorded on 17.5mm film with perforations. And and then of course, right at my time, it was begun to be recorded on a 1/4-inch tape with just a sync pulse. and I can remember the older guys, I don't care how you say it, if it ain't got perforations, it's not going to be in sync. That was sort of the attitude about what was about the revolution that was about to happen to cinema. Well, in the last 15 years, it's gone from being a photochemical, mechanical medium, first with sound, then into editing. and then ultimately into video projection, because projectors, you all saw Cinema Paradiso when you used to have reels of film. And it's become a totally electronic, or it's on the verge of being wholly electronic digital medium. There are still a few directors who are holdouts and want to shoot on film, and it's understandable. My own daughter, Sophia, prefers to shoot on film. Steven Spielberg wants to shoot on film and edit on film. And it's very understandable because, you know, in the 120 years that the cinema has existed, there have been so many fantastic masterpieces. People always say to you, well, what's your favorite film? What's your favorite film of all time? I say, I can name 50 masterpieces from the silent era alone. The films of G.W. Pabst and Murnau. In fact, Murnau once said, I thought it was a wonderful sentiment. He said, well, he says, you know, sound had to come, but it came too soon. Because they were learning how to tell stories with pictures, and they had only begun that work until suddenly, of course, the sound film, the Vitaphone came along, and it changed what they were doing, and for a brief time, movies became sort of recorded plays. Until then, it began to emerge as what we now know. And then, of course, in the post-silent era, I mean, talking about master, the Italians alone had more directors in the post-war period, beginning with the great father of them all, Roberto Rossellini. Has anyone ever seen Marty Scorsese's film called Viaggio in Italia, a documentary series? That's a fabulous thing. There are only 3 people. You should all see that. Marty goes through and teaches you, beginning with Rossellini, actually beginning before the war, this extraordinary period in which there were more Italian film directors than you could count on all your fingers and toes, you know, one after another. So in the post-silent era, when already there had been so many total masterpieces made, I would guess there may be 300, 400 film masterpieces at the highest level. Certainly many of the works of Akira Kurosawa and Ozu and Mizoguchi. Then we have the French, the New Wave. I've talked about the Italians. We have the Scandinavian films, not only Bergman, but also the Danish Carl Dreyer. So there has been this extraordinary literature of film. I wonder how that was possible. And I have this wacky theory that the desire to make cinema probably existed even before the technology made it possible. I mean, Goethe would have made films. He was a scientist and a student of color theory. Goethe and Schiller and so many of the great dramatists of the past, that when finally the cinema was born because there was possible to record an image and sound, it just like it was a collision, and this burst of cinema was born, and we call that these last 120 years. So the fact that my daughter Sophia wants to make films on film, and other filmmakers, Christopher Nolan, I think he insists on, it's understandable because even yourselves, you little by little, you're not going to have the opportunity to work on film because they're probably not going to manufacture it forever. Already, you know, I mean, it became clear, even I remember in my era, that you couldn't buy black and white film if you wanted to make a film in black and white. They didn't make it. They didn't bother making it. Let's hope they always make photographic film, despite the fact that we've gone into a new era. And I guess I kept looking at the fact that now the cinema, although it's made in a digital, totally digital medium, most of the films are, in a way, trying to express themselves the way the great films were in the film era, which is understandable. But then you have to think, gee, that's wonderful, but what are all the things that cinema can do now that it couldn't do in the photochemical era? Because the digital cinema is very promiscuous. It can do anything. It's not limited by physical, mechanical facts. It can be sent through the air and is on satellites. It can be you know, one actor could, in this magic of the digital age and of computer graphics, one actor could play every part in the movie and be short, be tall, be skinny, be, you know, just like they did in the early days of Les Paul and Mary Ford, when they realized that since the multi-track tape recorder you could repeat a track, you could have a whole orchestra be just on a guy in one instrument. So I began to think, gee, you know, I'm getting old, and I wonder, I would love to get a glimpse of what is the future. What are you going to be able to do with film now that it's digital? And, you know, what are the, not even your films, but what are your grandchildren's films going to be like? It's going to be nothing like what we know. So I decided to kind of run through the possibilities, and there are many, and we can talk about it after I show this workshop, because, you know, obviously there is the video game, and there's probably some seeds, although I don't know a lot about it. I'm sure there's some seeds in how these games and competitions are arranged that could be future cinematic works and collaborations. People could collaborate across the oceans. But a particular area that interested me, because I was ultimately a theater student when I was your age, was this idea of live cinema. Well, what is live cinema? Live cinema, is it just like, you know, when they do Peter Pan on television or The Sound of Music? That's live television, but why would that be different than live cinema? And maybe the difference is subtle, but the truth of the matter is that when you see something on television and it's a movie, you know instantly it's a movie. And it's coming to you on the television screen, so it's not because of the medium you're seeing it, yet you know it's a movie, and it's not The Young and the Restless, or what was the Grease that they just did, or what was the one they did, Sound of Music. Live television, which is a wonderful subject to talk about, still looks like television. It doesn't look like cinema. Why is that, I asked myself. Now, we know that when television first came about in the United States, it came after World War II. So until probably the 1956, it was impossible to record television. They could record it with what they called a kinescope, which was just taking a 16-millimeter camera and putting it in front of a screen and filming it. But you couldn't, there was no videotape recorder. That was invented, interestingly, in the mid-50s by Ampex. And on the team of the inventors of the video recorder, you know one name that's on it, Ray Dolby. And I always thought, gee, Ray Dolby, that must have been his father. No, but Ray Dolby was 18 years old, and he was on that team inventing the videotape recorder. But it was only then that you could record video. So when television started in America, they didn't really know kind of what to do with it, because the studios, the film studios, were extremely frightened of television as invading its place as the #1 entertainment. And the studios had bought up most of the literary material. So when they bought a novel, they bought all the works of that author and all the short stories, and they just owned every bit of literary material. So when television began after the World War II, there was very little material available. So they tried to do classics, and they would do Shakespeare, live Shakespeare. Live television was just what it sounds like. They had a few cameras, 3, 4 cameras, and they would do a Julius Caesar, and they would record it, but that didn't go over very well. And the interesting thing about the early days of live television was that all these young fellows from World War II who had been in the Army, and also the Army had many special services, like they would tour plays, and they would do dramatics and stuff, just like they have Army bands, they also had theatrical organizations. So there were a lot of young people that came out of the Army, people like Arthur Penn and, not Sidney Lumet, he hadn't gone, but Daniel Mann. There was a whole bunch of people, and they had survived World War II, so they weren't afraid of anything. They thought they were invulnerable. And they came to New York, and New York, of course, had the New York Theater, so there were all these great actors working there at night. And so they cooked up a little studio at the top of the Grand Central Station. They had a little television studio, or a famous department store. I think it was called, what was the, it was a famous New York department store where they had a television studio. And they would rehearse in the day. Which one? No, no, what's about? It'll come to me. And, which? No, that's not important. There was a television studio. And so they could get these actors, these wonderful Broadway actors, Eva Marie Saint, and all these extraordinary young Paul Newman, and you name it, young James Dean as well. And they would rehearse, and then on Sunday, when the theater is dark, they would do entire productions. But still they had a problem of who would write it, because they couldn't buy. And someone had an idea, well, you know, there were guys in the Army who wanted to write plays. Let's just let them write anything they want. And so they started doing that, and they let Patty Chayefsky and J.P. Miller, and that's when what we call now the first golden age of television, where they were doing these extraordinary writing. An interesting story that no one knows is that there was a show at CBS, I think, called Climax, and there was this hotshot director. He was one of the very first specializing in television director, and he was considered a wizard. And his assistant was Sidney Lumet, the famous, ultimately you may know as a film director. And Sidney Lumet's stage manager was John Frankenheimer, who was like an 18-year-old kid. And this great director, that they all had nothing but admiration for him, said, well, boys, he was also an actor. He said, there's a play I'm going to go audition for. Wish me luck. And he went for the audition, and he got the part. And the play was The King and I, and the guy was Yul Brynner, one of the earliest television directors, which Sidney Lumet told me this story. And so Sidney got promoted to be the director of Climax, and John Frankenheimer went on to become his assistant. And John Frankenheimer was a young man who very much had a cinematic image. He wanted to be a movie director. So when he did these live television shows, some of them at Television City, in fact, because that was in existence at that time. You look at, you can get on Criterion Collection and other archival, you can get copies of what they call the golden age of television, which is Marty and Requiem for a Heavyweight and these. But one of the greatest ones that really inspired me was something called The Comedian, starring Mickey Rooney, done by John Frankenheimer. In general, John Frankenheimer, to me, is the father of live cinema, because although he did these live television plays, they were movies. And it then made me think a lot. What's the difference between a play and a movie? Why would his films, John Frankenheimer's films, he also did Days of Wine and Roses, which is the beautiful love story of the couple who are tormented by their alcoholism, became a movie, and they didn't have John Frankenheimer direct the movie, and Jack Lemmon, and I forget who did it. But the live Day of Wine and Roses is so much more touching because it had performance, and it was really alive. At any rate, all this impressed me greatly. I was just a 17-year-old, 16-year-old theater student, and I saw this stuff, and I truly fell in love with television. I remember, because television is around 1945 when we first had it in this country. Although it was invented in the 19th century, the television could have emerged to the public in the world 30 years before the cinema did. It's just an accident that it didn't. And it's a very interesting accident because when television finally did appear, it had already learned the excuse me, the syntax and the language of cinema from the cinema. But it had been born before the cinema. What would have happened? What would cinema be like? What would television be like? We don't know. But all these things fascinated me. Do you remember a show? Well, no, how would you remember? But you remember the existence of a show, early children's show called Howdy Doody? Howdy Doody didn't look anything like the modern that you know. It was a sort of a hayseed kind of a lanky puppet. And his name was Elmer, but he used to say when he greeted people, howdy doody. And so they called him Howdy Doody. And then they had a copyright suit over who owned the puppet. And they made the puppet all wrapped in, I'm a 6-year-old kid watching this, wrapped him up in bandages because he was going to run for president, and he was having plastic surgery. And then when they took the bandages off, he looked like the Howdy Doody that you can see pictures of. At any rate, I was filled with memories, and I used to, as a kid, I used to play in the basement with cardboard television cameras and pretending I was doing television shows. Well, at one point, I decided at this ripe old age that I am, that I would write about, you know, basically my family and what I remember, and even generations of my family, because during that time of my grandfather, my father, myself and my brother, that was the invention and birth of television. And I thought you could tell the story of this Italian immigrant family at the same time that you'd be telling the story of television. So I started writing it, and as I started writing it, I began to think, well, you know, I love things that are what they're about. So if I'm going to write a story about the creation of this new medium, wouldn't it be interesting to do it in a new medium? And what would that medium be? It would be live television. What's the difference between live cinema, rather? What's the difference between live cinema and live television? And I realized that just as I didn't know how to do Apocalypse Now, I didn't know how to do live cinema either. I felt I did, but I didn't. And I thought what I should do is I should do like a workshop. And I had been to speak at several schools, as much as this one. And one school was a friend of mine who worked with me, was a school in Oklahoma. It was called Oklahoma Community College. And they had a beautiful sound stage, and they had a lot of enthusiastic students, much as I'm sure you would be. And they said, well, Francis, come and do your workshop here. You know, you could get some actors. There's in Oklahoma, there's repertory theater. Not much of a repertory theater, but you could also look in Dallas. You get a few actors, and you would have enthusiastic students, to say the least. So I thought that was a great idea, would give me a chance to try out some ideas, take some parts of the script, perhaps. And after I had done that, it was very fun. And we even streamed it when we did it. We did it live. And in the original, you wouldn't see them, but in the original, there are breaks for commercials, which were wine commercials. But the reason there were breaks for commercials, it was not really that we needed to have we needed the minute and a half to get organized because we were doing it live. And then every once in a while, we say, oh, don't worry, another 5 minutes, we're going to get to the commercial. We can, you know, we can reorganize everything. So the commercial breaks were needed to be able to reposition and change the actors' hairdos as they got older or whatever. So the breaks are still in there, what I'm going to show you. And what I'm going to show you is that workshop made by students really just like you. And also, after I finished it, I realized, well, I have a lot of questions. I learned a lot, but I have a lot of questions that I still don't know. Like, for example, what happens if I have a lot of people who are in costumes and have hairdos and need an army of, you know, wardrobe and hair people they can't have, economically, it wouldn't be possible to have them every day or have them through just sitting there. Or if I had an infant by state law, but nothing to do with movies, an infant can work 20 minutes, period. So what if I had roosters and goats and things? How would I do that? So I decided I needed another workshop to try out all those ideas and how I would grapple with them. And so UCLA, which was my alma mater, so well, you did it at Oklahoma City College, do it at UCLA. And so they let me come to UCLA, and I did another attempt at it. I learned a ton of stuff. I almost know how to do this, I think. In fact, I put it all down when I had some time because I had learned so much that I wanted to be sure to remember it, and so I wrote it down, and then companies saw what I had written, and they're going to publish this book, which is called Live Cinema and Its Techniques, which is going to be available, which is basically just step by step what I learned about all the areas, how to prepare the actors. Also, I did an interesting thing. I used a lot of equipment. I used a lot of equipment that is used, it was invented for sports, because sports is pretty much the only live, really live, aside from news. But in those fields, there's a lot of equipment that was invented for sports that I thought would be really interesting to try to use for storytelling, and so I did. And what you're going to see evidence that. So what I did, now of course it's not live anymore because we did it, and although when we did stream it, and some friends in Beijing saw it, my wife saw it in Paris, my daughter saw it in New York. And what I did is I took the Oklahoma workshop, and I took the UCLA workshop, although the UCLA was the first part of the story because that was the one that had all the 1920, that was the older period. And I also was curious, what if they're speaking Italian? I have to have subtitles, all those kind of practical things. So then I cut them together, and that's what you're going to see. It's about an hour long. It's not really good like a piece of, like I said, well, this is my new film. This is a total experimental workshop, and we're learning as we're going, but it was very exhilarating. You could ask me, what's the point? When my wife saw one of them, she said, well, it looks like a movie. Why do it live? Why give up the control? And my feeling is that, for hundreds of years, the theater, which is thousands of years old, has based around the concept of performance. Back in the 18th century, when they did these extraordinary operas, the era of the German opera, the Italian opera, these were vast productions involving costumes and choruses and dancers and story. They were like the movie directors of that day. But the difference was that they put these massive things together, and on the day the audience came and the guy got up there in front of them and he made the downbeat, and they did it for you live, and it was performed, and it was a thrill. Imagine to have been there the first day they ever did Turandot or Carmen or the Meistersinger. Or for that matter, imagine being there when they first did West Side Story and you got to be there that night. You'd never forget it. So I felt maybe there is a value to performance. And because in our era now, your era, everything that you enjoy pretty much is canned. Be it movies. I mean, movies are great. They can be great, but they're canned. And even rock concerts, which you go to hopefully because they're live, are very almost partly canned. My granddaughter goes to the movie. She wants to be a movie director. She is a movie director. She did the film Palo Alto. And they go, whenever a movie opens, they go the first night. And I said, why do you go through all the hassle? She said, because we want to see it before everyone tells us it's good or bad. We want to be there at the performance. So my question to myself, is it worth it to have performance? At any rate, I'm going to show you this now. Where am I going to go sit? Right down there. You see why I had the chair up here, because I knew it was going to take me longer to tell you this. But this is, it's from a work in progress, which I'm still writing, and actually has become quite a bit different than the text. The actors are local. I'm sure you have a repertory theater company here, and if you do, we cast. There were like 8 people to cast from, so it was more limited, but they did great. And the thing about those of you who are theater students as opposed to film studios students, theater still has that wonderful group experience that you become so involved with one another, and it's a family gathering doing a show. Whereas film, when I went to UCLA, everyone was stealing the one moviola that they had, and and there was alone in a room, and I very much miss the ensemble feeling that you had from theater. And this, in live cinema, you really have it, because what you're doing defies the odds. I mean, it's literally 1, 2, 3, go, and the whole thing is done live. So here it is, distant vision, and then I'll come back, and I hope you have tons of questions for me to ask, and I hope in answering them I will learn more. Thank you.
Well, the highlight of today, I think, will be the questions and answers. Let me tell you that I learned an incredible amount. As great as your prologue was, I think without seeing it, I wouldn't have understood what you were trying to do. Of course, I've got more questions than understanding, but my first question, I guess, or my reaction...
Could I switch places? Now I'm
Yes.
used to being on that side.
Come on. Anything you want. Now I've been directed by Francis Ford Coppola.
Be honest.
I found it much more, if you will, less raw than I thought it would be. I
pretty
found it
raw.
to be, well, it's raw. It all depends, of course, but it's a workshop. It's not a. I called it a film. I said the students are going to watch your film, and he said it's a workshop. And
Yeah.
but
Actually, two workshops. One
Yeah.
about less than a year apart. All the old stuff at the beginning with the costumes and the old Italian, that was UCLA, and then it joined at the Oklahoma part.
Right. But it was apart from in addition to the educational value, it was tremendously enjoyable and entertaining. Wouldn't you agree? It's fantastic.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you two brief questions. I think, Ross, you're going to moderate questions from the students. But I'll start with the screenplay, if you will, with the theme. So family, Italy, Coppola, all of that. Was it easier to use a theme like that? Would you have considered this experiment, this workshop, in a totally different genre, horror, sci-fi, anything else, or did you almost need to go with something familiar?
Well, this is an important issue because, I'm sure many of you are writers or are about to become writers. And I read somewhere, I forget who said it, but, if there's something you're afraid to write that. Because, and ultimately, it's personal. You could say to me, "Oh, make a movie about Edwin Booth or General Grant of the Civil War," and I would try to search in those stories something that is personal to me. And I think all literature, mostly the great books that we love, are just that. Tennessee Williams plays, they're personal. So I always tell my children and my grandchildren now that their writing is, if you're going to write something, make it be personal, because, each one of you is 1,000,000 to 1 shot that you even got born, if you know the whole story of the biology and what have you. So now you're here, and it means that if you do something, if you write something, or you choose to make the subject matter of your work really personal, that means there's going to be nothing else like it, because there's nothing like you. So yes, especially at my age, I thought, well, I've made movies about this, I've made movies about that. I've always tried to make them personal and to make them be something that I could love about them. But now, as I'm going to have a few last opportunities to do this, all the more I want to, because in the course of writing something personal, something about my family or what I remember, even just working on this, I've learned so much about what really was going on at that time, to understand that my father, who was a great concert flutist who hated to play the flute, but had lost an older brother and a younger brother, he felt isolated, and I never quite appreciated those things. So yes, I would say those of you who are going to write, make it personal. Write. I think Strindberg once said, write what you know and in a state of emotional frenzy.
There were some special effects in the film, the boy falling off the roof and eventually and all that. But can you in this genre, how do you deal with things that are so highly, if you will, technical?
I did that stunt deliberately. A lot of the things I did, especially in the Oklahoma was more the story, kind of. But later I said, well, what about all these production issues? What if I have to have a lot of costumes, or what if there's a stunt, or what if they're speaking Italian? And so I deliberately chose to do things that I might not be able to do, to see where, it said in that little opening thing, what are the limitations of live cinema? And bottom line, there are no limitations. I could do Lawrence of Arabia live. Now that doesn't mean that there's going to be a guy standing there waiting with the walkie-talkie to send the camels, you know. But there is enough technology, and especially the stuff involved that I said from sports. Remember there was a scene in there where the mother finds the kids playing doctor in the bathroom, and she sort of has a fit and keeps repeating. It's like suddenly becomes a Polish art film, you know. That was all live, but it was using football replay equipment to be able to recycle images and stuff. So you know, there's a solution of anything you might want to do in your story. There's a way to perform it, I think, live. Now, did any of you see the recent Woody Harrelson production? You saw it? Did you go to a theater to see it? Yeah. I'm amazed that, like, out of this whole thing, only you saw it, because it was pretty extraordinary, I thought. But of course, they had one very important difference, is they did it with one camera. Had you seen that German film called Victoria? Have any of you seen a German movie called Victoria? It's quite good. It's a night in Germany, a young girl hanging around in the clubs and people getting in clubs, out of clubs, going into taxi cabs. She eventually gets involved with a lot of deadbeats and a story where they're involved in a bank robbery. And it's all done, shot continuously with one camera. Of course, we know of, you know, many films or a number of films that are shot with one camera. And then that film, Victoria, was the inspiration for the Woody Harrelson movie, which was when you shoot live, one camera, you've solved 1 billion problems. You know, because you can imagine, first of all, the thing I learned is the actors are not the problem. If you rehearse them properly, give them a chance to arrive at what they're going to do, the actors will come through for you. So what Woody Harrelson did is he had this wonderful group of actors. I encourage you to see both Victoria and I think it's called Lost in London. I don't know how you see it now. It was in theaters. I'm sure you'll be able to rent it at one point. But he had this group of actors, and they could really perform it in and out of clubs in London and taxi cabs and stuff. And I think they must have just rehearsed it with a little, you know, handy cam or something to rehearse it. And then when they did it with a good operator on a steady cam. So doing it with one camera, you know, solves all the issue of how do you deal with 50 cameras and have them ready to do these sequences. We had, I think, 40 or so cameras in the Oklahoma experience, all with young students and sometimes actors who had never been really on a camera. And I'm convinced that, in a way, they did better than the professional cameraman, because the professional cameraman would be saying, you can't do this, what they were doing. But they were fabulous, and I have no doubt, having done it at UCLA and having done it at USC, if we did it here, I'm sure you would be fabulous, because there was such an eagerness to try, and they had no idea how to do it, nor did I, which is a good combination.
Speaking of cameras, there were tons of cameras in the film. I mean, I don't know if you're clearly technologically oriented. You love it. That's how you met Barry. Many of the students here probably on the creative side. Do you recommend that everybody learn a lot about the technology along with whatever creative spirit they hope to pursue?
Well, I'm sure that, you know, this generation already is comfortable with digital technology and cameras. And we had an array of cameras. We didn't have, we shot at 24p, which was difficult because how to do that. And if it had been studio cameras, we wouldn't have been able to do that. But 24 frames gives it more of a cinema look. I think we did it in, you remember how we did it at UCLA? I think we had some humongous converter, and all of the cameras fed into that, and it all kind of came out at 24p. But again, of course, you know, for those of you who are actors, the UCLA, a lot of the cameramen on the UCLA, camera people, I should say, were actors, and they came back saying it was so wonderful to understand, by being on that side of the camera from the point of view of what it is when we're acting, and they learned, they learned a tremendous amount. So I would say yes in answer to your question. I'm happy, by the way, while a little time we have together, to answer any question about anything, be it about technology, about writing, about acting, about production, about wine, about life, politics, you name it.
Thank you.
I'm happy to take a shot, and I hope someone's going to stump me and ask me a question I don't have an answer for.
Great.
So
We'll try.
So if you guys have a question, if you want to approach either of these two microphones, once selected, and we'll go back and forth. So does anyone have a question
Right
to
there.
get us started?
Right there.
So one of the things that I'm getting from you is that you're saying that you want to bring the live element back into the filmmaking process. I guess I'm unclear, is it to bring the live element for the filmmaker or for the audience? Because I definitely see the live element from the filmmaking standpoint, but from the audience standpoint, I'm not sure I'm grasping
why that's worth it.
well, why that's worth it, and how that compares to different technologies like 360 videos or even Snapchat stories.
Well, of course, our Snapchat stories are pretty short by nature, right? Well, those of you who make films know that to make a short film where you have to keep an audience's attention for a few minutes, it's like sort of building a bridge over a ditch. You can lay a 2x4 and you can get across a short ditch. But to get across the Golden Gate means then you have to have structure, because there isn't a plank that will. So the longer the time that your piece is, the more you need to worry about dramaturgy and various other elements of structure that are designed to keep interest in the audience. Primarily, a lot of people ask me, why do you want to do it? And I guess I don't have a good answer other than I think performance is worth it, the sense that a group of people are going to get all stoked. And you saw at the end of the show, all those kids were really enthusiastic. It wasn't that we had done anything so great, but we didn't know we could get through it. And I think they were more applauding that we did it, than oh, it was so terrific. I think if I were to do it again, if I were to do it for real, which I hope to do, I would build into the directing of it things that were dangerous and could cause real screw-ups. For example, in fact, has anyone ever seen, now it's 2 years ago, the YouTube awards that Spike Jonze did? Greta Gerwig did a dance. Get that. I think you can get it. But Spike Jonze did something I thought was brilliant. I don't know if he intended it. He must have intended it. But he had certain sequences. For example, if there's a scene where the actress is supposed to get up on a step ladder to get on a high shelf to get the big knife that she then kills the husband in the big scene, and you rehearse it, when you do it, you might suddenly conveniently not have the stepladder be there, because the actor is going to, when the actor finds that the stepladder is not there, they're going to panic and they're going to get up there and get the knife, but you don't know how. And so I would build I would build obstacles next time where the performers think that there's going to be the knife to cut the chocolate cake because that's where the gun is hidden or the whatever, and then not have the knife be there. So they have to do it with their hands, or create situations that sort of sabotage the actors, and in a deliberate way, knowing that the audience is going to be thrilled because there is a little bit of going to a NASCAR race to see something like this, because you're waiting for the major screw up, and that gives it exciting. But isn't that what happens I mention opera because opera, even more than conventional theater, involves tons of elements. You have the orchestra playing, you have the ballet dancers, you have the flies and the Valkyrie have to come down on the thing. So the more complex it is, the more the performance becomes, like something that just is a thrill, not only for the people doing it, but for the audience who sense them. I've had this discussion with my wife because my wife is not totally convinced that doing it without having the ability to edit and improve it, again, it's people say to me, why give up the control? And you have the control, but you have the control more the way you have control when you direct an opera or a play or a musical or something. But it's not a play format. It's sort of what it's like to explain. Everyone says, oh yeah, I mean, it's like a play. It's like if you took a Pixar storyboard, what they call pre-visualization, which is a word I made up, by the way. And everyone argued because they say, how can you have pre-visualization? You can have visualization. There's no such thing as pre-visualization. I said, but you know what I mean. It's the planning of what the visualization. But if you had a storyboard and on the stage you had all of those frames that are the cuts, and the actors running through, popping up in each one of them, doing that part of the shot, and then cutting those together, that's sort of what live cinema is. Because cinema, just as literature, the basic unit of literature is the sentence. Whether it's a novel or whatever it is, if you have a great sentence and you put it together with another great sentence, before you know it, you have a great paragraph. And then you have a number of those paragraphs, you have the beginning of a great piece of a literary work. But in the cinema, just as the sentence is to literature, it's the shot. And the shot is the component. And as you know, if you have a discrete shot, and you put it next to another shot, you have a kind of magic which we learned from the great Eisenstein, which is the basis of montage, just as in old silent films when they had a shot of the girl being tied to the railroad track and then a shot of a locomotive speeding. The audience, how did those genius pioneers know that the audience said, what is that locomotive? Where is that? But they worried for the person because they felt emotionally, they put it together, felt the girl was going to get run over by a locomotive. That's the magic of montage. So in television, the basic unit is the event, the baseball game. And the shots are coverage of the event. That's how they do it. They basically, on a soap opera, they have a set. They don't have as I said, the Pixar storyboards, they have a kitchen and the people sitting, and so there's the master shot and there's the shot, there's the coverage. But that gives you more of a utilitarian way to kind of show the components of the scene. But if they're not great shots, if they're not if they're not discrete shots, if they're not conceived as shots, then you lose the ability to do that magic of montage. So for live cinema, it has to be shot-based. And then, of course, in theater, the basic unit is the scene. That's one way I try to understand or explain what the difference between live cinema is and live television. The answer to your question is I don't know the answer, is that I think there's a value to a live performance, and the question is, this was not a live performance because this was a live performance, but now it's been recorded. But still you get the idea of the fun that might be if you were really, imagine if you were going to go to the theater at 8 o'clock and you were going to see a new Marty Scorsese movie that, you were going to get there early, so you're going to be one of the first people, and it was going to be being performed live for you. There would be, I think, I'd be excited. And so it may be, and the fact that the digital cinema can do it, the old cinema couldn't do it. So that's kind of why and also when I was writing about, it's true, my family, my grandfather, the sort of would-be ladies' man there, was the one who built and engineered the Vitaphone. It wasn't the television, but it was the machine that made movies talk. So our family has been in this business, and I felt if I was going to tell a story about television and the early days, and I know I had described to you before that I was playing with cardboard cameras, and then you saw the kid do it, that somehow it would be wonderful to tell that story if it was a story of the kind of about television and the family involved, and it would be nice to tell it in a form of, or the modern evolution of television. So that's why I got on this kick of wanting to do it as a live cinema.
Thanks.
So thanks. Who's got a question? Young lady over there. You can shout out the question too. I can repeat it.
I already made the move. Okay. Hi. So I grew up in Youngstown, which is it's in Ohio, and it's a very heavily Italian, used to be mob-run community. And one of the things that I really love about The Godfather and this live cinema as well is the fact that you juxtaposed the things that are like supposedly moral absolutes of things that are supposed to be wrong, and then you show, like in the wedding scene, Don Corleone, like he's doing things that are in general punishing misdeeds, and he's kind of refuses to do things that he deems morally wrong, and there's all of this Catholic influence and stuff like that. Did you intend in both projects to show that juxtaposition, or was it just like a natural thing that occurred in the process for you?
When I worked on The Godfather, because it was a novel by wonderful man Mario Puzo, and I knew nothing about gangsters. I had never met a gangster I never, nor had Mario Puzo. And all of those great, he wrote it from research. And in fact, all of those great lines in The Godfather that everyone quotes were all things his mother said.
Really?
So, you know, what I did is when I worked on The Godfather, I just sort of made the people live in a lifestyle that I remember, you know, what it was like in an Italian-American household, except my family were all musicians and tool and die makers, and then I just took the, you know, it's like what in acting they call a substitution. In other words, I did it for my family and just said as if they were gangsters. In terms of the moral issues of The Godfather, I think I understood that the book must have tapped into, I knew it was a book about America, and with this metaphor of like a king, the Godfather, and his three sons. It was like an almost Shakespearean tale. And it must be about power and capitalism and stuff, because oddly enough, Donald Trump, Barack Obama, Saddam Hussein, Putin, Gaddafi, The Godfather is all their favorite movie. And another guy, all those kind of guys that are involved in politics and power and all spend their time quoting The Godfather to each other. There's another, I just thought of another one of those.
I do
Who?
too.
Yeah.
Oh, Mayor Giuliani, for sure. So somehow Mario very cleverly, whether he knew it or not, you know, did that, made it be a film about capitalism in America, and it came in that. I don't know that I can claim the credit for it. I think I recognized it, and I tried to, in my bringing it to the film, tried to, you know, make it be evident.
I find it interesting that you say that you based it on like your Italian-American upbringing, because I rewatched both or all three movies in the last couple weeks with my friends, and my one friend said, well, all they do is like go to funerals and eat pasta and then there's murder. And I was like, yeah, well, welcome to my childhood. Except for the murder, that wasn't part of it. And then my brother insisted that I ask you, was the horse head real?
Yeah, the story of the horse's head is, of course the horse head was real, but I didn't kill the horse. What we did is that animal lovers, you know, that always bugs me that they, you know, 15 people are murdered, they talk about the horse. The truth of the matter is your cute little doggies eat horses that they kill to make dog food. And all we did is we went to a dog food company and we said, when you kill the next horse that vaguely, in fact, we went to the dog food company, the art director, and saw the horses that were slated to be killed, and we got a live horse that looked like one. And we said, when you kill that horse for the dog food, for the pets, they packed it in a case. My little boys, oh, look at the horse. It arrived in a case with dry ice. You know, people, you know, I am one of the highest people who, you know, believe that we are ridiculously cruel to the animals we live with. But the truth of the matter is that that horse was killed by a dog food company. And in the apocalypse now, which is something I'm, you know, that when the caribou that's killed, those native peoples in apocalypse now, the Ifugao people, they were very primitive people, and the money was the least of their compensation. They were to get so many chickens a day, so many pigs a week, and a caribou, which is a water buffalo, 2 water buffalo, 1 at the beginning, and they have a big celebration like our Thanksgiving, which they invited me to see, when they sacrificed the first water buffalo, which they did like that. And in fact, the chief gave me the heart as though I was a you know, big shot visitor. And we had this this water buffalo's heart in the freezer or whatever. And so when I did the end of Apocalypse, I knew when they were going to do it, and I asked permission just to photograph it. But you know, that was it. If we didn't get the stuff, we weren't going to shoot a second. We weren't going to do it a second time because we really only documented the actual ceremony. And you could see on their faces, it was like Thanksgiving is the people they were going to eat. You know, it was their holiday. So yes, the horse's head was real.
I'm not from PETA. I just.
Do you have a dog?
I actually do.
And do you feed it pet food?
Yeah. So, yeah.
Your brother owes you big time.
First off, it's an honor just to be speaking to you.
It's my pleasure to be with you.
My question has to do with, there's an early scene with the family all eating dinner, and there's a baby crying. And I actually asked my film teacher in high school about The Godfather, and there's a lot of babies crying throughout the film, especially during intimate moments. And we both could not come to the conclusion of what the significance was of that, if there was any at all. So I was wondering if you could shed light on that, because if anyone
Well,
would
I've
know.
always just loved kids all my life, and I love babies, and they make me laugh, and I love to look at them. And I was just saying to my wife today on the plane, I said, I said, Rachel said that, well, I've never met a person who's always pointing out the kid. Oh, look at that kid. Oh, look at that kid. I just like kids. I think also it was the way I was raised. I moved to many different neighborhoods. I never was in the same place, so I didn't have a lot of friends in school. And when you have polio, they would keep you away from any kid because they didn't know whether it was contagious or not. So I just, all my life, I've loved children, and I've been blessed because I was married very young and had children right away, and my kids have been a real source of pleasure. Now they're grandchildren. And all my career, whenever we would go away for more than 2 weeks, we would always just take all the kids out of school because we'd taken them with us. Nowadays, that's hard to do. As a result, all my kids are movie directors. So I would say that I think in terms of families that are kids running around, and it always made me happy when my cousins came over and stuff.
Thank you. Also, I would regret it for the rest of my life if I didn't ask you, but I have a copy of the Godfather script. Could you sign it? You can say no.
Yeah, give it to that girl with the pink hair over there.
And going forward, we're actually going to bring the mics to you so you guys don't have to stand up here.
Yes, young lady.
Hi.
Or
Go ahead. Okay. I actually have a question about The Outsiders. Which cast members stood out to you the most during the filming process?
Tom Waits was great, in fact. You know, those were all young boys. We cast The Outsiders in a very interesting way because one thing I've done is I've always experimented on how you cast. And so each film was different. That we had, all of those kids were there sitting around, and I would say, okay, you come and read Pony Boy, and you read, and they would read in front of each other. And then say, okay, now you read this part. I liked very much, I liked Matt Dillon. I thought he did great, and I liked them all. Tom Cruise was extremely fanatic. I mean, if he had to be in a fight, boy, he would give everything. And I heard he's still like that, where he just, I mean, he gives everything he's got. The kid who played Pony Boy was wonderful. You know, your cast, especially when they're young, it's a little bit like your kids. It's hard to say you like one more than the other, you know, or your films.
And my second question is, in the
Do you know that in the Outsider, the original movie had a number of scenes out of it, and the kids would say, "Oh, what happened to the scene with Soda Pop where he does such and such?" So when my granddaughter was about 12, she asked me to go to her school and show a cut of it and then talk to the kids because they were reading it, and kids that age just loved the Outsider book. And I got the cut on which I had on a video, a Betamax, that was before I cut out a lot of the scenes. And so because I was tired of kids saying, "What happened to the scene?" So I showed them the whole thing, and they really were pleased with it. So then I went to Warner Brothers and asked them to make the Blu-ray, the DVD, which you can get, which is, I think if you get The Outsiders today, it's that one. It's called, it says The Complete Novel, and it has all the scenes in it, and I think it's much better. So just a tip that there is the original version, which is missing a lot of the Rob Lowe scenes. and the new one has all the Rob Lowe scenes.
And my second question is the Lee Strasberg cameo in The Godfather 2. Whose decision was that to bring him in?
The suggestion, you know, I had gone to try to sell Elia Kazan to play the part. And it was interesting because it was very hot, and I went to Kazan's, you all know who Kazan is. He was probably the greatest director of acting in movies. The performance in the Kazan movies are always superb. So I went to, he was an older man, and I wanted him to play that part. And he was in his office, in a little office and he had no shirt on. You know, he's an old 80-year-old guy, you know, without a shirt. So he turned me down. And then later, Pacino suggested that I do it with Lee Strasberg, who was a pleasure to work with, by the way. And that's why in this movie, The Godfather, when he goes to see him, Hyman Roth, Lee Strasberg, he has no shirt on, because I was remembering the impression that Kazan had made on me. So I told him to do it without a shirt. I don't think he realized it was because Kazan had it. But you know, Lee Strasberg in the studio, he was famous for the technique known as sense memory. Sense memory is, you know, they do sense memory exercises. You know what it is, right? It's like you, in the morning, you brush your teeth, and then you go to class, and then you show the class how you remember the central experience of brushing your teeth, and you're able to do it in a very convincing way, even though there's no toothbrush and stuff. He, in the story, the Lee Strasberg part was on an airplane, and they wouldn't let him, which is a true story, they wouldn't let him get off at any stop. And so when they arrested him, he was, you know, he had been in and out of all these places. And Lee Strasberg did that all through his technique of sense memory. He did it. You really felt that he had been in and out of a million airports and, you know, not given admission. So I was always impressed that Lee, who really hadn't acted a lot, but had taught acting, and he used that sense memory technique perfectly and beautifully. So that's an interesting thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Afternoon, Mr. Coppola. I've been tinkering with writing for the past couple of years, and I was wondering, before you start creating a story, before you sit down, write the screenplay, get it going, do you get a general idea of the plot, like I want X, Y, and Z to happen, or do you start developing the characters and start developing them, like you said, around people you know, experience you've had? Yeah, just do you develop and then you find the plot in the characters?
There's no one way. The thing is to know yourself, whether you're the kind of person who likes to think it through and prepare it beautifully and then have it and then go and execute it. A lot of writing for me is to begin to know what you're comfortable with. Like, when do you like to write? Do you like to write in the early morning? Do you like to write late at night? Do you like to be in a certain situation? Do you like to have a cup of coffee? Do you like to have a glass of scotch? I mean, it's good to have it the way you like it. I like to write early in the morning because I get up and I'm rested, and it's too early. No one's called me up and hurt my feelings yet. Because if your feelings are hurt, it's very hard to get past that, you know. I sort of sketch out the beginning of a step outline, you know, 1, 2, 3, and then I get impatient with it, and I tend to not. I don't have the willpower to just go through and really make myself do the whole thing. But so I'll start working even with the incomplete step outline. And one tip I really give you and every one of the young writers here is when you begun and you're beginning to write the pages, turn those pages over and do not read them, because I am convinced, I've said this before, that in a young writer there's a hormone injected into your blood that makes you hate anything you've written. So if you look at it, you're just going to start rewriting it, and you never get to. Better to just do the 4, 5, 6 pages, whatever your designation is, and then be happy and enjoy yourself, and then the next day pick it up from there. And even if, like 30 pages into it, you decide you're going to make the main character, instead of a man, it's going to be a woman, don't go back and start rewriting it. Just write it as if you made that. Avoid going back and redoing stuff, because you're not qualified to know what to redo yet. It's only when you sit down and really read the whole thing that you begin to have an inkling of what it is. And who knows, maybe the first 20 pages you're going to cut off, and so all that rewriting wouldn't have been worth it anyway. You're welcome.
Now we have one right there, and then.
Hi. I just kind of back to the topic of live cinema, kind of the resurgence of the popularity of theater, and with the past
popularity of which
in theater, like in the past 5 to 10 years, and like the kind of introduction to kind of like, for example, like Birdman did those long takes, and kind of in that kind of like a one chance kind of a theater way. Do you feel it's almost kind of cyclical in some sense of kind of we have the traditional film sense, and then kind of moving back to a more of a theater, I guess, and it's kind of a in a sense.
Well,
like
I don't think the Steadicam, which is how they now are able to do that kind of one shot, is necessarily. I mean, it's like theater in that you get to not advance through editing. It's all one shot. But there have been film. Russian Ark is all one shot, I think. And even before the Steadicam, there was what we used to call the handoff. Did you ever see I Am Cuba? I Am Cuba is a Russian film, a great film. But a handoff is where they would hold the camera and then say, my colleague is over there and he's on a lift of something, and I would do the shot, and then I would very gently put it in his hands, and he would receive it, and then it would go down. In other words, it's the same thing, except it was done with different people at different points, handing off the camera. So that's always been one of your choices, stylistic choices, when you're making a film. When you make a film, I think you arrive at, well, I'm going to make it in this. Now, when I made The Godfather, I said, well, The Godfather is about this kind of Shakespearean almost family, so I'm going to shoot it in an extremely classical way, like the camera's not going to move a lot. It's going to be hopefully beautiful images that play, and then a more classic kind of, it's as though every shot is a piece in a wall, and each one is a brick that gives you a little more of the information. Whereas another style, that's very much the style favored by, say, Ozu, or the photographer of The Godfather, who is Gordy Willis. Vittorio Storaro, on the other hand, with whom I made Apocalypse Now, he believes the camera should be like a moving pen, and it should move and show you and be this and do that. That's another style. That's Max Ophuls. So there are many styles you can choose from, and of course you could combine, if you wish, if you have an idea of how you want to do it. I like to, again, tell my kids that I choose the style really out of what I feel is the theme of the picture. When you're about to do a story, it's nice to know in a word or two what the theme is. Like Godfather, I thought was about succession. The conversation was about privacy. So if you have one word or two words that in your mind is what it's about, then movie directors have to make a lot of decisions really fast, all day long. What color, long hair or short hair, what a dress or slacks. And usually your gut tells you how to do it, but when you don't know the answer, like I remember on the conversation, they had like a bunch of trench coats to choose which one. And I didn't know which one. And then when I don't know how they answered the question, I said, what's the theme? Privacy. So I chose the coat that you could see through. Usually knowing the theme can help you make a decision if you're a little unsure. One of the decisions is the style. What style are you going to make the movie in? Is it going to be handheld? Is it going to be classical, beautiful, this shot to that shot? Is it going to be... Nowadays, movies, the good film directors tend to use a nice, beautiful coverage, but they like the long Ozu shot where one frame just doesn't even move very much. You look in a movie and look in the corner of the frame, and you'll see that it's constantly doing that, you know. So that's all part of my latest movies that I did when I was doing the little films the president spoke about. I financed them myself so I could do whatever I wanted, and I fell in love with the Ozu style where the frame doesn't move, and because then you have exits and entrances. The frame is, you know, exciting when someone walks in or comes from the back and comes forward, or, you know, if the camera's always moving, like Breaking the Waves drove me crazy. It was a CinemaScope constantly moving handheld. So again, all the stylistic issues of the movie that you're going to make, how you're going to use music, how the style of the acting, everything is yours to choose, and when you're in doubt, then look at what the theme is, and that will help you, I think.
Okay, so we only have time for 2 more questions. I have one right here.
Why only 2 more questions? I flew all this way, and they only...
Ross, there's one behind you.
Okay.
But tell you what, who has a question to ask?
Right there.
5, 6, 7, 8. So 15 more questions.
If Francis is not rushing, we're not rushing. Go ahead, young lady.
Oh, is it my turn? Hi, sir. Great to meet you. What is the most rewarding part for you being a writer and a director?
Well, it is you know, being honest, when you adapt a movie from a novel or a play or some previous text, whoever wrote the previous text did the heavy lifting. So when you really cook up a story on your own and write a script on your own and then get to direct it and it sort of vaguely works, that's the most, for me, is the most exciting, because I feel, you know, I mean, directing a movie, of course, is a fine art, but again, even writing a script from like The Godfather, Mario Puzo did the heavy lifting. Or, that's why if you notice on my movies, you'll always see that always says, you know, Mario Puzo's The Godfather, Bram Stoker's Dracula. Who's the guy who wrote The Rainmaker? John Grisham's The Rainmaker. I always feel it's the writer who dreams it up that is the artist that I so admire.
Thank you.
Yes, young lady.
Well, my dad's a big fan of yours.
As
And
what?
so my father's a big fan of yours.
Oh, thank you.
And
But not you.
no, I am immensely, sir. But when I told him you were coming to USC, he was like, "Man, I wish I was a student again. Like, what? Why does this always happen after I've graduated?" But I asked him if he had one question to ask you, what would it be? And he said, "Well, I'm really interested in his winemaking." He wanted to know. He told me, he said he'd ask, what are the similarities and differences between winemaking and filmmaking in your eyes?
Okay. Well, both break down into three acts, so to speak. The first is the gathering of the source material. With the filmmaking, you're choosing the subject matter, you're choosing the actors, you're gathering the elements out of which you're going to make the film. And in the winemaking is you're growing and gathering the grapes. The second phase is always the making. So in the case of the winemaking, it's when you smush the grapes and you begin to put them in the fermenters and you do the various phases of fermentation. In the movie business, when you shoot the film and you do the editing and you begin to put them together. And the third phase for both is the finishing. In the winemaking, it's the final blending and the fining and the putting it in the package with a label that you can present to the audience or the customer. And in winemaking, you do the final color balancing and the music and the final beautiful titles and everything so that the audience can see it. So I have been asked this a lot, and I think probably all creative processes probably break down into maybe three phases like that. You know, gathering the stuff, making it, and then finishing it.
And they can both be intoxicating.
Hopefully.
Now, good wine.
Or are there any Italians in here? So if they be intoxicating, I say magare. Magare is a great Italian word. It means, oh, that it should be. Magare.
We had a question right here.
Going back to live cinema, it seems to me that while it certainly will change the methods of production and preparation for actors, it also would probably affect distribution. And so what I'm wondering is, since you're at the forefront of this, what do you envision as the ideal audience experience for live cinema?
What I would do if my script, I only did a little dent in the little things I was experimenting with. It's really much longer, and the way I'm thinking now is the way I wish I could do it is probably it will be in 2 parts or maybe even 4 parts. I don't know, you know. And the way I would like it to be is that you say, you know, okay, just like they did with what's his name, Woody Harrelson's, although it's sort of disheartening that only one person heard about it because it was in the theaters. It was very worthwhile. But I would like to let everyone know that I'm going to do this new work, My Long Day's Journey into Night, as you were, and have them go to theaters, be there at 8 o'clock when it's going to start. But also you could see it at home in your home screening room or at the, you know, now cinema can be shown anywhere here. And I would like to do it live, maybe 6 performances. So you could go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and see you could see this again, except a different performance of it. I got that idea because I read somewhere that Noel Coward, who is the great English playwright and actor, if he wrote a play at his later age, he'd be in it 6 times. So you do it like you could go to the theater and see it, or at home, or you could see it in the theater at night and see it Tuesday at home, and you could see it anywhere in the world. You could see it in all the different time zones. And then that would be done. And if you wanted to see it, it would be like you saw it, archival. And then 3 months later, we would see part 2. And again, there'd be 6 performances or 7 performances that we would do every day, and so forth till we did the whole thing. And it would be seen in theaters at the same time. The theater owners, they have this thing they call a window. You know what a window is? Window is that if a movie comes out, if the new Iron Man movie comes out, the theaters want to know that it will not be available to the home audience for 6 weeks. That's going to go away. The public gets to be the boss. So if you want to see the latest film that's out now, also, you know, at the same time as the theater's showing it, I think eventually, very quickly, you will be able to. You'll be able to see what you want when you want to see it. If it's live, however, you can't see it before it exists. That's another thing too about piracy, because piracy is a big issue. As you know, you can go on the internet and pretty much download anything, but you can't download something that doesn't exist yet. So who knows, that may be a factor to make the live cinema more viable.
Hello. So first of all, every fifth time my father calls me, he likes to remind me that no poor bastard ever won a war dying for his country. So I believe I have you to thank for that.
But no, not me. You can thank George Patton, because he said that. I was just the screenwriter.
And my question is, it's kind of a painful truth of writing that the most difficult thing is finishing what you've actually started. And I was wondering, like, at what point do you feel you've produced the final draft? And is this point different, like, if you're going to go on to film and direct the script, like with Godfather, as opposed to if you're just written it and someone else will direct it, like a Patton?
Well, I mean, first of all, for some reason, one of the most difficult thing on earth is to get someone to read what you've just written. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, so many people nowadays, certainly screenplays, but novels and other things, and they're all trying to get someone to read it. It's hard to know when you're finished until you get some chance to bounce it off someone, and what did they get out of it? Because, like my granddaughter Gia is just writing an original screenplay, and she feels she has it, and then I say, well, get some friends or 8 people together and read it aloud. And then they do that, and they read it aloud, and of course they get more input from the actors and the experience of hearing it. And now I know what to do. And then they go back and they write it again, and they feel, okay, we have it. And so you want to do that a few times. Actors are misunderstood people. Actors are not only, total enthusiasts about acting and the theater and cinema, but there's not an accident that actors are the category that statistically most become filmmakers. That, in other words, writers they can direct films, or editors can direct them, photographers, a few of them. But a lot of actors have become great filmmakers, so that it shows that their actors are extremely, helpful people on a set. I hate it when someone says, well, how'd you get that performance out of that actor? I didn't get a performance out of the actor. All you do is you kind of make it comfortable for the actor to do their work, and occasionally throw out, like a coach, a little suggestion. The actor does the performance. The actor knows better than you the character that they're playing. So again, getting a group of actors together and doing your script as a little half-assed one-act play or something is very valuable. And little by little, you start to get the confidence that maybe the text, the script is ready. And then even in the making of it, you're going to learn a lot from the actors and your other colleagues. So and then later when the editor comes on, you're going to be learning from, these are collaborative art forms. That's the joy of them. I read a lot of stuff I said, and I see the quotes, but one I've never seen is collaboration is the sex of creativity. No one likes that quote, but it's sort of true. I mean, to work with your colleagues and dream up a project and get excited together and throw ideas back and forth, that's the thrill. But yes, that's how you eventually start to have the feeling that maybe it's starting to settle, and then you know in your gut.
So this is regarding everything that you've learned after doing the 2 workshops. What would you say, after both were completed, was the key element in creating a successful live cinema performance? If you could, you mentioned everything that you've learned.
Well, of course, it goes back to the story and the script, because in the end, the live experience is the means of, creating the piece. But if the story is dumb or it didn't have anything of value, it's hard. I'm sure there are other ways. This is just, in terms of live cinema, I think I'm just peeking in, and even this is very much like, you know, old movies or old theater. I don't feel that I've yet, or maybe I never will, because you know, we're all prisoner of our time. I was your age in you know, 1959, and you know, it was all Tennessee Williams and Elia Kazan and Marlon Brando and Arthur Miller. I'm sure I'm forever limited by that in a way, you know, because I think I so admired those great people at that time. You have other people you admire, and it's good for young people to rip off the older artists that you admire, because you can't. In other words, if you try to make a film like whomever it is you admire, you'll be making your film, really. And that's a good way to discover it. I read once, I don't know, it was a French author, famous Balzac or someone, in a book he said, oh, I hope the young writers, you know, sort of copy me, because they'll be making me immortal through their work, and they won't be able to copy me. That they'll be finding themselves. So I wouldn't hesitate to, you know, my father used to say, steal from the best. I mean, if you want to write something and there's a writer you admire, you know, it's yours to take. But again, you won't be taking it, because it'll just be helping you find what you have to offer, and then someone hopefully will do it to you and rip you off. You hope. Magari. Yeah. You can shout it out, I can hear.
Yeah, so I'm really interested in the production process for live cinema, and sort of, I guess you mentioned that with theater it's much more collaborative, has this sort of family feel to it, whereas film is more fragmented with the departments sort of all on their own. How did you bring, or were you able to bring that family theater feel to live cinema?
The rehearsal process, you need, obviously you can't do this without rehearsal. That's a given. And you know, it's what you do in the rehearsal process that all happens. Because you don't just sit around and read the script over and over and say, okay, you stand here, you stand there. Rehearsal is a combination of games and exploration and improvisation and fun and you know, getting to encourage the actor to play along with you. And then there's a certain magic that happens after the second or third week, and you begin to stage it and do it. So that's where, see, in movies, they don't really rehearse. In movies, the economics is so, you know, even if they have a week of rehearsals, all they do is they take the actors around to all the locations so that on the day, as they say, it'll go more efficiently. But they don't really, rehearsal is a wonderful process. And you know, I've written a little book about this live cinema, and I think one of the best chapters in it is the one that outlines rehearsal, because it's good for any plays or movies, what you do in the rehearsal period. And you learn about things like there's a wonderful book on theater games by Viola Spolin, Spolin. That's very worthwhile. And you know, basically, you try to keep the actors engaged and using improvisations to supply memory. Like for a man and a woman, I'm married to my wife. Did my wife leave?
Yeah. For a moment.
I knew she was going to leave. I've been married to my wife for 54 years, so obviously there's a lot of memories. Well, you play, two actors get there, they're going to play a husband and a wife. They don't have any memories. So you can do improvs to say, okay, let's do when you first met. And you know, when you do improvs, you always give each actor privately a different instruction. So like you say to one, try to borrow $100 from her, and then you tell the other, you know, he's owed you $5,000 for 3 years, and he never mentions it. So you try to make, it's the same thing as the obstacles. If I were going to tackle live cinema again, I would do a lot more of what I said, of tricking them so that there's that moment when suddenly the prop isn't there, or the actor isn't there, or they've got a, they get an adrenaline rush. But there are a lot of things you do in rehearsals that have nothing to do with just reading the script. And I very much think, are some of you, I don't know, are some of you theater students? Ah, so great. And some of you are cinema students? And then, of course, now they have something called communications, I suppose. Yeah. Well, no school on earth that I've ever seen do the film students and the theater students get along and hang out together. Because the cinema students think the theater students are all weird and pretentious. But in fact, they're your best friends. And if I were running a program, I would make the first year of film directing students not go near a camera, just do one-act plays. Because in a one-act play, first of all, it's cheap. Second of all, if it's a short play, 3 directors can each choose the one-act play and you do an evening. But most important is is that you get to see the effect of your work on an audience immediately, and you learn so much from that. So yeah, I'm a believer in what do we call that? Inter or cross disciplines.
Yeah.
Obviously, cinema is a descendant of theater, so I mean it's all related. Yeah. We talked about you while you were away, dear. Always good.
54 years of wedded bliss.
So, having grown up in an Italian family in New York City, I did appreciate your authenticity with your live cinema work. But in Apocalypse Now, what made you decide to keep that Martin Sheen scene in the beginning where he's drunk and babbling?
Why did I keep it?
Yes.
I felt that Apocalypse Now, much of Apocalypse Now and Heart of Darkness, which Eleanor made the documentary about. Did you ever see the documentary called Hearts of Darkness? Alternate title is Watch Francis Suffer. But in answer to your question, I felt that the character spends most of the story as an observer, like it's, Martin Sheen looking at this weird thing happening or this weird happening or something else. So I felt it was very important at the beginning to give the audience some inkling or some visceral experience to say who he was. So I cooked up that. Actually, it was a dream. I had a dream. Martin's a very handsome person. And I had a dream that in this dream it came to me that he was not only handsome, that he was vain. And that if I goaded him on how to look in a mirror, how handsome he was, and look at his face, that would somehow make some fireworks in him. And I did that. And ultimately he punched the image, and that's why he was blood. But I wanted a scene like that to give the audience some memorable experience of what he was like, so that later throughout the movie, when he was just a pair of eyes looking at something, that you would feel you knew him.
You have time for a couple more?
Yeah.
Okay. Ross, up to you.
No one was
That's
counting.
a lot of pressure on me. I don't know. Okay.
I didn't think I'd get this far. All right. Do you have any advice for maybe a first-time director who has no idea what they're doing, or if you had one piece of advice?
I am a 12-time director, and I don't know what I'm doing. Not knowing what you're doing is, in a way, a blessed childlike state. And what it means is, when you know what you're doing, perhaps it means that you're going to follow a route that has been prescribed, that you've learned and stuff. But not knowing exactly what you're doing means that you're going to rely on your intuition, which is the most important, most valuable thing you have. The 6-year-old in you, Picasso said it takes a long time to become a child. Or he said, what did he say about I took my lifetime to learn how to paint like a kid? A kid, has nothing but intuition. He has nothing but his instincts, what he likes. Oh, that's pretty. I like that. So, you know, I think it's useful to cultivate the 6-year-old, and you obviously you apply some superstructure of more logic, but you know that if you do this, that will be interesting. So I think you don't fear not thinking that you don't know what you're doing, because I mean usually, certainly, important art very often is rubbing up against the edges of what people know what they're doing. So it's risky to do. You know, there can't be, I think, beautiful art without risk. It's like trying to make a baby without sex. You have to have risk. Risk means that you're trying something that's on the edge of what you know how to do.
Ross, let's go to the way back and finish up with two, maybe a little bit from the back. They've been, I can assure you, Francis, they do know how to behave like 6-year-olds, though, on the weekend in particular.
No, you know, I've now had the experience with the Oklahoma school and the UCLA school, and I feel that if we did something like this, you guys would be great. So,
Yeah.
You what? Okay.
I am a master's candidate and a documentarian, and I also bought a bottle of your wine that I hope you'll be able to sign for me. But I loved this because it combines documentaries and acting. And this is kind of a contentious thing, but it seems like sporting events that you referenced earlier are the only thing that really drive people to tune in at a specific time that they can't TiVo necessarily and watch later. Because of the spontaneity. You never know what's going to happen.
You don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
And they don't, and more important, they don't know what's going to happen. The picture when it's a countdown, and we in some of these games recently have been that kind of last minute thing, is a thrill.
Yes. And so I know in theater we try to replicate that as much as we can, but it seems like what you're doing has the opportunity to employ some of those devices. If you were to have like a end your own story kind of way, or if you have some social media impact with that. Is that anything that you've thought about incorporating?
You know, I've talked about this with the students before, and there are obviously many. When I say, oh, live cinema is one aspect of what you could do now in this new digital cinema, in other words, it's only one thing that I, you know, probably because I was a theater person that I want to do, but networking with others in some sort of collaborative, creative experience, and I mean, the sky's the limit. I think you're about to go into a golden age, because, I mean, how logical is it that the entire cinema can change from a photochemical, mechanical medium to a digital medium and not change the essence of cinema? It has to. You're making it a totally different way. And that means all kinds of possible things are possible that if we sat here and just kept saying, well, this is possible, it will be. So yes, I'm not capable of, I'd have to look into a lot of stuff that could be done on the net together, collaborating, or with video games and stuff. I don't know enough. But I'm sure that there's a vast, rich series of possibilities that you guys are going to invent. Someone's going to invent it.
Hi, I'm actually going to ask you to help me with a problem I have in my own writing. Hopefully you can fix it. In many of your movies, you've used monologues by main characters like Patton and Kurtz to establish their point of view on issues and events in the film. Besides descriptive language, what other techniques and tools do you use to keep these monologues interesting and useful, as well as keeping the audience engaged during long-spoken passages? And additionally, and more important regarding my own writing, when you review and edit a monologue, what steps do you take to balance artistry with accessibility?
Okay. Now, can you ask me the question again, but just in your own words? I mean, I know those are your words, but
no, I'm sorry, that's confusing. Yeah, I have a problem with my monologues where, like, basically I kind of like try to take it and turn it into like its own piece of art and it kind of looks good on
Well,
paper,
you know,
but it doesn't sound good or it doesn't really fit to cinema.
Well, interestingly, the monologue, which is a convention of theater, or even further, the soliloquy, guys like Eugene O'Neill were very concerned with bringing, because they all vanished from the theater. Modern plays don't really have a lot of conventions that old theater had, the chorus at the beginning, the soliloquy, stuff like that. And he wanted, and if you know Eugene O'Neill's plays, he wrote many things that put masks back and monologues and soliloquies and stuff. Obviously, the forms like that are exotic to audiences who don't normally get to see them. They're tricky, but I think if you want to do it and you know why you want to do it, you want to get certain ideas or you want to get a window into the guy's soul, I bet you can. But because it's unusual in a film, you're going to have to experiment with it, I think, probably. I mean, experimentation is good because you might, you put your monologue in there and then work with it and see if something is suggested that is a slightly different way to do it and discover it. O'Neill, what was that beautiful, crazy thing he did where it's a love story and it's told only through the soliloquy of the man and the woman? They never talk to each other, but you always hear what was that called?
Love letters?
Brief encounter? Any rate, there is a Eugene O'Neill play where the lovers just do soliloquies. I love that kind of stuff, I mean, I think movies, especially now, they're all like, there's some, who said it? Roman Polanski? Yeah, he said if you cut the main title off the movie, you don't know who made it. But, there are other filmmakers that, like even my daughter Sophia, even if you came in the middle of it, you know she probably made it because she has a style. And so working with these ideas such as you're talking, I think are really healthy. It's hard because, it's different. So audiences will first recoil unless you learn how to trick them. And go ahead. But I got in a lot of trouble over that. How old are you now? I was maybe 23 or so, or 4, when I wrote that script, and the guy going to play Patton was Burt Lancaster, and he hated that monologue, and ultimately I guess I was fired because they felt my script had too much sort of what is it called when you're born over again? Reincarnation, and particularly that monologue. And he said, well, it starts with him, and he's already, a multi-star general and stuff, and so there's no development to how he got to be a multi-star general. My feeling when I wrote it, when I created that opening of Patton, was it was sort of like giving the audience an experience of who he was in a way that you couldn't forget. And then years went by, and Burt Lancaster didn't make it, and then I heard George C. I was gone already. George C. Scott didn't like the script that had been made for Burt Lancaster, and someone said, oh, there was a nutty young guy who wrote this script. And they did it, and everyone makes a big fuss of what a great beginning that was. So, and I've said this before, the stuff you do when you're young that you get fired for is the same stuff that they give you Lifetime Achievement Awards for. And it's logical. It's because you're rubbing against the grain. You're doing something that's not how they do it. And although you could get in trouble for it, and I did, you can also, if you get to be an old guy, then they say, oh, wasn't that great what he did, I love the opening of Patton. I think that was, and I thought the director did a great job in how he did it, and Scott was great. And incidentally, that speech is really a couple of 2 or 3 speeches of Patton smushed together. It's all his words.
Well, I think that compliment to youth is probably the best way to end today, that some of your best work is right here, in your grasp. It's right ahead of you. Have confidence. Don't overwrite. Don't rewrite too many times. Listen to the expert here. Be confident in what you're doing.
I rewrite a lot.
Okay. Rewrite a lot.
Ellie,
and be confident
Ellie,
in what you do.
who said the advice was rewrite? Who said that? Mario Puzo said rewrite.
But by the way, one other thing, not to the sports analogy with live cinema, as we head into a Sweet 16 basketball game at Madison Square Garden and in California, but you know this not the from a viewer point of view, but the athlete and the actor. Early this season, our men's basketball team was fresh and a little reckless, and they won every game. Toward the half, toward the end, I think they were probably overcoached a little bit, over-practiced, over-rehearsed, if you will. So we hope now at the end of the season they could bring that youthful energy and exuberance. But I'd like to present you, Francis, with, he's going to sign the bottle of wine. And I'm going to ask him to sign a baseball, too, later. But I've got the President's Medal for Francis Ford Coppola. This is surely something he does not have. You know what it is. It's a beautiful golden medallion of a gamecock, and that is something he surely doesn't have. So let's all thank, once again, Francis Ford Coppola.